should be considered and eliminated until one fuel can be identified as meeting all the physical damage criteria. For example, if you find pulverized concrete, which we all know there was in all 3 buildings, there was pulverized concrete, the only fuels that can create seeded explosions should be considered. So they shouldn't be considering fires. They shouldn't be doing that. It doesn't account for pulverized concrete. They should only be considering exotic accelerants and explosives. 19.4.8.2.6, extremism. The terrorist may include fire as but one of a variety of weapons along with explosives used in furthering his or her goal. We know they used them in '93. Why would we not test for them now? There was reports that day, multiple reports, which I'll get into in a second. So they could have put them in the basement. How do we know that unless we test for it? I mean, even if it is the terrorists that they claim they are, we need to test this. 14.3, preservation of the fire scene and physical evidence. We find the following. The cause of a fire explosion is not known until near the end of the investigation. The entire fire scene should be considered physical evidence and should be protected and preserved. It's just over and over. There's so many. You can go to our website, the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. We have many more of these actual chapters that cover what they should have done that they did not do. So now, by their own admission, in all 3 building collapses, NIST refused to physically test, like Dr. Stephen Jones did, for explosives. This is just unbelievable. And here are their excuses, and I quote, "It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected, either prior to September 11th or during that day." So again, I've been on a lot of fire scenes, and I've seen a lot of investigations, and why would we not test because something's hard to do? That's the exact reason you need to investigate it. If that was hard to do, we need to find out how they did it. And number 2, NIST excuse. In addition, no blast sounds were heard on the audio tracks of the video recordings during the collapse of World Trade Center 7 or reported by witnesses. That's one of the excuses why they didn't test. Well, apparently they didn't read Chapter 18. 18 is the general definition of explosions. Although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not, in big bold letters, an essential element in the definition of an explosion. The generation and violent escape of gases are the primary criteria of an explosion. So that alone says they should have tested for it. But then we also, NIST has lied, and we can prove it. As soon as the new investigation happens, the evidence is out there for you to see right now. We have 118 first responders who reported explosions. We have the radio transmissions from FDNY members that are still recorded today that reported explosions. We have audio recordings. We have video recordings. I've personally talked to witnesses that heard them. So there's nothing short of saying they lied, and they need to be held accountable. And besides that, like I said, there is no excuse for not testing for explosives. And so at the very least, at the very best, even if you want to believe the official story, this was the most incompetent investigation of all time. And I've talked to a lot of investigators that were there, and I asked them the specific question, why did they refuse to test? They weren't the ones who refused, but NIST did. And they said, all we can say, all they can answer is incompetence, or they tell me to shut up. They cannot give me any reason that follows national standards. So, but the reality, after all the research everybody here and the incredible people we're in the room with today have done, the reality is it was a criminal investigation to cover up the crime. So, just to finish, I'd like to read a quote. This is from a retired, decorated FDNY lieutenant. Anyone who knows the fire service, he is a stud. He worked on Ladder Company 26, Rescue Company 3, Rescue Company 1 in his career. Anyone who knows, those are amazing companies. Here's his comment. Trade Tower 7 by itself is the smoking gun, not hit by an aircraft with only a few relatively small fires. It came down in a classic crimp and implosion, going straight into its basement, something only very precise demolitions can accomplish, which takes days, if not weeks, to prepare. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention it, and FEMA actually stated they didn't know why it collapsed and left it at that. Brothers, I know that the above implications are hard, almost unthinkable, but the official explanation is utter nonsense, and 343 of our murdered brothers are crying out for justice. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, there you have it. And that last part was real interesting. That's the part we never get to hear, where firefighters and other investigators who know how to investigate tell you that that's nothing like what happened. And remember, 6 out of the 10 9/11 commissioners have stated for the record that there was some sort of government agreement not to tell the truth. Now, that's not conspiracy nuts talking about that stuff. That is the people involved in the original 9/11 Commission cover-up that said that. I'll tell you, I spent a frustrating, maybe off and on all day for a couple days going back and forth looking at videos on the internet. And every once in a while I took a look at the comments, and you'd see some sort of nutcase talking about the official story being correct and putting down whatever evidence there was, and I'd go in there in good faith and type in some of the facts that they were neglecting, and they'd come back calling me, insane and a twoofer, whatever that is, a twoofer. It's a woofer with a T in front. I guess that's how they spell truther. But we don't call ourselves truthers. That's a derogatory, stupid term anyway. How about just an ordinary citizen that demands an ordinary investigation the way any investigation would be, carried on? It bothers me that we had no real investigation, and yet everybody's satisfied with it. Why? In a murder investigation, you have a much bigger investigation. This was a murder. It was a crime. Well, my answer to all those folks that I couldn't convince or that were unconvincible, one of them in particular, I said, yeah, are you one of those government disinformation guys? It's well known that the government has admitted to running covert programs against the 9/11 group. And he may or may not have been, but every one of his responses was irrational, yet calculated and deliberately conceived to attack whatever evidence was contrary to the official conspiracy theory. So my answer to anyone else out there that is still skeptical, David Chandler is a high school physics professor who forced NIST during their conference to admit to free fall. Now, free fall for any amount of time is significant because it means that there was no resistance from the building below. Everybody says free fall is not significant. Well, yes, it is. That means that the building below was moved out of the way. That means that what's falling from above is not knocking it out of the way. If it was, it would be slower than free fall. So that means that none of the potential or kinetic energy from the upper part of the building was used to destroy the lower part of the building. That's what free fall means. That's why that's significant. I don't know why I had so many arguments with these guys, but that's why free fall is significant. It means that some other energy source moved the entire building out of the way to promote that free fall acceleration. So I'm going to show a David Chandler video since nobody seems to be dialing, and this is one about the North Tower. But I recommend that you all go to YouTube and watch all 9 of his videos before you start criticizing the 9/11 group again. So run it if you got it, guys.
This is the start of the collapse of World Trade Center number 1, also known as the North Tower. We are here tracking the motion of the roofline at 0.2 second intervals through approximately 32 meters or 8 stories. This graph shows the height of the roofline as a function of time. The analysis is simpler if we plot velocity as a function of time. On this kind of a graph, a straight line indicates constant acceleration. First note that there is a sudden onset of collapse, as the point we are tracking makes a sudden transition from being at rest to an approximately constant downward acceleration. The slope of the graph indicates that the acceleration is 6.31 meters per second squared downward, which is 64% of free fall. In other words, once it starts falling, the upward resistive force is only 36% of the weight of the falling section of the building. So far, so good. But now turn it around. Newton's third law says interactions between objects work both ways. The forces two objects exert on each other are always equal and opposite. If the upward force acting on